My name is Kukule Tumfupi, and I have the pleasure of being your MC and moderator of a panel today, as we'd like to go through a journey where we've seen significant stakeholders and partners come on board to actively participate in sharing their concerns, but also raising solutions as to how best it is that we can address early childhood development in South Africa. To those of you who are joining us presently, thank you again for your time. We also do have a virtual audience, so if you've taken the time to log on from wherever it is in the world that you are, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We trust that you too will be participating in this exciting and auspicious occasion that we have here today. Well, I think as we all reflect back on early childhood development, it's quite clear that we are all products of it. How we speak, how we read, how we think, how we problem solve, how we interact. It's well known that in order to grow and develop any kind of economy, you need to make sure that you invest, most importantly, in your human capital. That, however, cannot happen as a delayed response to leakages in the system where children are not actively invested in and actively participating in terms of their education, training, and development. And today we're going to go back to the foundational stages of unlocking some of the insight that will be shared by the Thrive by 5 Index, which primarily focuses on children between the ages of 4 and 5, unpacking their stages of development relative to their age and in comparison to their international counterparts. Now, this takes a look at their physical development, how it is that they process reading and literacy and problem solving, and of course, their socio-emotional management. Today, we will have the opportunity to deep dive into some of these numbers and really peel back at the reality of what our early learning development entails and how it is that with government, private sector stakeholders, and participants like yourselves in the room, that we need to formulate solutions that aid and assist us in solving these challenges. So it's going to be a reality shock. Some of it might be uncomfortable to accept, but most importantly, it will give us a roadmap as to how it is that we can formulate the solutions that are necessary to move forward. So we're excited to have you here once again. A gentle reminder to many of you who are joining us as key partners that this particular index was initiated by First National Bank and Innovation Edge, together in collaboration with the Department of Basic Education, supported by the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and ECD measure. Now, if anything, this should underscore that collaboration and partnership is what we are about. And that is exactly the process that we'll continue to follow with going through following today's program. What I'd like to invite many of you as our participants who are going to share and exchange in some of the views that will be highlighted today to also share this messaging with many individuals on public platforms, primarily on social media. Feel free to do so by using the hashtag #ThriveBy5SA, #ThriveBy5SA, and this will give us some insight as well into sharing much more of the themes with members who are joining us virtually and those who cannot be here. And a reminder as well that you can actually log on to the Thrive by 5 website. It officially went live after 12 midnight this morning, so you will be able to view the detail, the insight, and the nuggets and the true reality of what we are seeing in terms of childhood development in South Africa. I'd like to remind you all, particularly the members of the media who will be sharing and communicating this message with the rest of the world today, that as you walk in, you will likely receive a bag. That particular bag has some early childhood learning material that is present there. Now, the beauty about this is that it shows you just how we are approaching early childhood development, our role and function in society from a multi-pronged approach. Some of the material there has actually been made by recycled products from companies within the manufacturing space, and the material itself is actually used to aid and assist teachers and educators in upskilling much of their students and, of course, being able to share some knowledge and insight with them. But we do want to strongly encourage you as members of society to make the circle bigger. Take it forward, contribute, and participate. And in those usually known as media, we like free lunches, we like goodie bags, but this one we ask that you share. And please extend this with the particular partners who are supported by FNB, ECD program partners. You are able to actually leave your bag behind. There's a table towards the left-hand side, my left-hand side of the room, where these particular bags will be distributed to ECD development centers that are supported by FNB. There are alternatives available to you, though. If you do have a specific ECD center that you'd like to donate it to, you are more than welcome to drop it off there. But essentially, it's not for you to keep, but it's for you to share. And in your sharing, communicate as to what this particular package is, how it's been established, and most importantly, how it aims to fulfill the objectives that we're going to highlight today. Those are a few of the house rules, and I trust that we're all excited. Are we? Yes. I'm not convinced. We're talking early childhood development. I'm not too sure how many of you are parents here. I'm the cool aunt, but parents, educators, cool uncles and aunts in the room, I think we all know a few young individuals that we really care for, right? By show of hands? There we go. So today's conversation is really one that we can extend not just to our family tables, not just to the office, but also to the family brides and even to the boardrooms where we're able to influence strategy in focusing on early childhood development. So are we excited? There we go. Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we have a few speakers who will be joining us here today to give us further perspective and insight into the program. We'll also engage in a panel discussion with key stakeholders to give us their thoughts. But without further ado, I do believe that there's a video for us to highlight today's outcomes and concerns. And following that video, there's a key partner who's joined us here today. Jacques Celia, the Group CEO of FNB, will be giving us some insight as to why it is that a financial services institution has actually taken it upon itself to actively participate in changing the status quo and the narrative of early childhood development in South Africa. As the video plays, following the end of the video, please warmly welcome Mr. Jacques Celia to stage.
From the very start of life, every child has the right to a nurturing and safe environment, to quality healthcare and nutrition, to opportunities for learning, to the experiences and things that allow them to thrive. Children who thrive by the age of 5 are more likely to start school with the tools they need to complete their full school journey. They're more likely to go on to further studies and access meaningful work. For the first time, we have a way to measure whether South Africa's children are thriving by 5. The Thrive by 5 Index is the largest survey of preschool child development ever attempted in South Africa. Starting in 2021 with intent to repeat every 3 years, the Thrive by 5 Index assessed 4 to 5-year-old children in all 9 provinces across all income groups. 65% of 4 to 5-year-old children attending early learning programs in South Africa are failing to thrive. In other words, 2 out of 3 preschoolers begin their formal schooling journey without the right basic foundations in place. This is evidence of the massive inequalities that persist in South Africa when it comes to the experiences that children have in their first 5 years of life. Experiences that are likely to reinforce intergenerational cycles of poverty and exclusion. The time has come to tackle the injustice of unequal opportunities in early childhood. Join the collective action to increase the percentage of young children in South Africa who thrive by 5. Our future depends on it.
Good morning. I think actually what is in that goodie bag is homework. You know, when you go to school, it's amazing the creativity that some of the material here on the tables can actually deliver, right? And so I was reflecting on a goodie bag, thinking, no, there's a bit of homework for you all. So special day. Thank you very much for everyone who made this day happen. Clearly, there's a lot of excitement, a lot of build-up, and so I wanted just to recognize that. But it's my great honor to formally welcome you all here today. And obviously we don't have the minister here yet, but let's recognize her also in her absence. Angie Motshekga, thank you very much for all of the role you play and continue to play in our worlds. I'd also like to acknowledge all the public officials in attendance, the partners in this initiative, and all the stakeholders from academia, especially civil society, NGOs, philanthropists, childhood development centers, foundations, media partners, incredible amount of contributions from everyone here today. So thank you. I think it's all protocol observed, as they say. So as a country, you know, we measure thousands of stuff on an annual basis, lots of stats about our economy and about our production, and everyone monitors those statistics all the time with a great amount of enthusiasm. And one of those, as you know, is our matric results, which is every year celebrated. And for many, the matric results is a reflection of past efforts, and for others, it's a little bit of a signal and a forward-looking indicator for the future. But actually what we've come to realize, for those who are involved in the educational world, and certainly for those who are trying to recruit top talent to work in our enterprises, that unfortunately, you know, none of those really are the primary indicator for the society that we are setting up, and for those who need to take the baton of running, you know, sort of the worlds that we'd love to live in. In fact, what we've realized is that there's a missing leading indicator in our society, and in many ways, like we do as a business today, we celebrate business indexes, consumer indexes, property indexes, and as a brand, we invest heavily in those as indicators for the future that could sort of steer society and play a role in facilitating those messages. What we're doing today is introducing a very special metric, which has not been something that we designed ourselves, but with a massive amount of partnerships. So this index that we are celebrating as a sort of a 5-year-old index, right? We typically speak about school readiness. If you wanted to sort of use older language, today it's getting a bit of a fresh tone to it. But effectively, that would arguably, other than how many people you have in your country, be the biggest indicator, leading indicator to how difficult is it going to be to run and be functional as a society and a community, right? And so whether it's in your own little, you know, sort of world that you live in, or whether it's a broader society, that ability for us to have put into the world, people are ready to sort of tackle the world by the age of 5, as you'll see today as it comes out, is a very important. Now, for people in the room, obviously, you are we don't have to convince you, but there's a massive amount of work that we need to do to get a broader appreciation for this incredible forward-looking indicator. So the Thrive by 5 Index, initiated by us and Innovation Edge, thank you very much for your role. And then contribution, obviously, from the Department of Basic Education and the United States Agency for International Development, and then the ECD measure teams as well. Thank you very much for helping us to get to today, and it's an exciting phase that we're going into, obviously, from here. Now, there's an old African proverb about, you know, the village that helps you raise a kid, right? We all know that. It's a bit, you know, I guess it's a bit of a cliche, but it's incredibly relevant for things like today that we are here to celebrate and discuss. Now, that first 5 years of your person's development, clearly the most important, because it's when the human brain gets sort of funged, and it's that little sponge that you have, that if someone helped you to fiddle with your sponge when it was fiddleable, that sets you off into an incredible journey, right? And that allows you to deal with whatever the world throws at you. We know that there are gaps in educational systems. No educational system in the world will ever be perfect. We also know there's gaps in people's sort of basic capabilities, and clearly that is something that wants to develop. But if you can do the most you can by the stage that you're able to start absorbing whatever the world throws at you, that really is incredible. So it's a sobering thought, and one should concern us all, that given all our responsibilities for our children in our country, these stats today reveal a massive job for us all to do. It's not a little project. It's not something that we could just do with, okay, let's just remember to do something tomorrow. It's a massive ask. This is, when as a business, we obviously face challenges from time to time, and every time you come across a challenge, you try and calibrate how big the job is, how strong the team should be that helps you to facilitate that task and gets you to the other side of the challenge. But you'll see from the stats today that was represented, we have a massive task to do. And then you've got a different angle to these sort of challenges. You could either be scared about them, or you could be worried about them, or they could excite you. And I think in a room like this, we all recognize that we are a community of people that are actually excited about this opportunity. Not that it's not difficult to do, but it is really, really special into seeing just the energy of participation from so many angles, trying to make a difference. What we also try to do is on our platform, on FNB's banking platform, we are starting to create a number of initiatives around sort of our ESG themes, and also in terms of helping enable a broader scale. The biggest challenge, as you all know, is always about not coming up with the themes, but actually really scaling them. And so we're really trying to scale our execution into our client bases and our ecosystem around us. And one of the things that we've launched in recent times has been this ability to go onto the FNB app and very easily donate and very easily adopt and very easily navigate some of the challenges and the needs for our efforts. And through that process, to date, over 1,000 early childhood development centers and old age homes have been adopted on our app since going live a few months ago, and we haven't really advertised anything yet. So you can see the excitement around demand, right, and is definitely out there. But then supply is one of the powerful things, that if we can bring our communities together to match supply and demand more efficiently and innovatively, and take out a lot of the friction that is contained in some of these challenges, that really it allows us to introduce exponentialness to the outcome. So exponentialness for us is in two ways. One is that you get the sort of, if you think about it in the context of statistics, is if we can add 10% per year improvement just over 3 or 5 or 10 years, what the outcome could be for a society, right? So every little initiative we can do is a little bit like your compound interest in your own investments. Like if you do a little bit all the time, then they make major impacts along the way. So I'm just obviously also acknowledging all of our partners that help us with our own initiatives to help scale into our world. And then I think the post-pandemic effort allows us another lens of opportunity and excitement. And I think in the sort of opportunity as the markets open up, and as people are looking for new ways of doing business and doing education, the tool sets that have certainly been made available as a consequence of the pandemic, I think there's just a massive appreciation that we actually are in the starting point of a very exciting journey. Even the switch between the government departments for the topic is an exciting agenda that we wish people well. Thank you very much for getting us here, the previous department, and obviously for lots of excitement and commitment to help the new teams responsible for the build out, and you can count on us as, I think, on behalf of corporate South Africa, really, that we really want to help and participate in making all the magic, because we all know how important that is for us. So as you listen today to all the findings and the outcomes, I wish you a great deal of creativity and courage to participate in whatever way you can, and to also keep on stretching and pushing the boundaries. It's one of those that I guess is a little bit of a theme, that once we get the ball rolling, the world keeps on rolling faster. It's like snowball effects, and in that lies a big ask. As I said when I started, there's homework to do. Hopefully you get that back and you open up and you sort of add your creativity for the rest of the day. But thank you very much for everyone for making today happen. We really appreciate all of the magic that you contribute already, and for all those watching on the cameras, thank you very much for the contributions. Thank you.
Thank you so much there to Jacques Celia, the Group CEO of FNB, giving us some insight into the participation of the financial services institution to really shift the needle when it comes to ensuring that we create a crop of leaders that are able to lead, innovate, and of course co-create the kind of economic dynamics we need. And I think it's quite poignant what Jacques mentioned, right? And maybe to learn from what he said about our sponges being spongeable and being able to absorb much of that information is that right now, FNB is actually hosting a leadership conference upstairs. And that should tell us something, that these are individuals who are implementing strategies, shifting the status quo, innovating the kind of financial services solutions that we require, and addressing our needs as members of society in order to make sure that we all live a better and effective life. So if we're not taking care of the roots of the tree, we can't complain when it doesn't bear fruit in the end. So again, that should be a reminder as to why it is that today's conversations remain quite critical for us to engage and, of course, share some innovation and perspective on. Well, we're keeping the momentum going, and we will continue checking the energy in the room just as a litmus test, because this is something that we are quite keen and excited about. And I think given the insight of the stats that we heard in the introductory video, it's certainly gotten our attention that 2 in 3 children are not thriving by the age of 5. They're not meeting their growth developments. They're not meeting their learning targets. And this really leads us to ask further questions, seek more insight into fully understanding and unpacking what it is that we should be addressing and how so. Well, to give us some insight into the report, a reminder that the full report is available online, thriveby5.co.za. Feel free to log on, read through the numbers, evaluate what it means, and of course, continue to share some of the feedback with our peers on social media as well. But to help unpack this for us in a concise manner and share some perspective with us to really walk away with tools that we can grasp, information and insight that we can continue to share and absorb, allow me to warmly welcome our first speaker, who'll share some of the findings of the first Thrive by 5 Index officially launched today, Sonia Giza, the project lead for Thrive by 5 Index. Please warmly welcome Sonia on stage.
Everyone in the room today and all of those people who are joining us online. A special welcome to Minister of Education, Angie Motshekga, who's just about to enter the room, so I'll re-welcome her when she arrives. Jacques Celia, you've met him, clearly an avid supporter of ECD. Special welcome. To the US Consul General and our other project partners. And also I'd really like to also acknowledge the Innovation Edge team, my colleagues that are sitting in the room today. I'm really thrilled to be here. It's been a long journey of about 3.5 years bringing this index to life. And while I'm the person standing here, this is really the product of a considerable team effort involving over 140 people. So I'd like to acknowledge the broader team, the enormous amount of effort that went into producing this index. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the thousands of children and their caregivers and the ECD practitioners who agreed to participate in this landmark study. So just to echo some of the messages that Jacques presented, as a country, we do collect data on a number of things. We track our GDP, we look at unemployment levels, we look at business index, business confidence and consumer confidence. And every year we eagerly anticipate the release of the matric results and we dive into that data. And each of these data sets gives us some indication of how well or poorly we're doing as a country. And for many of these data sets, they're repeated at regular intervals so that we can understand the trends, whether things are getting better or worse, and then we respond appropriately. But the foundations for a prosperous society are laid well before children complete their schooling or seek employment. Our experiences in the first 5 years of life set our trajectories as individuals and collectively as a society. It's therefore clear that one of the most important things we should be measuring as a country is whether our young children are thriving. And until now, we simply haven't had data to track this critical indicator. And this is the gap that the Thrive by 5 Index hopes to fill. The index seeks to answer a fundamentally important question. With all the early life experiences that we're giving our children in South Africa, are we setting them up for success? There are about 1.3 million 4 to 5-year-old children in South Africa, and roughly 72% of these children, 930,000, attend some kind of an early learning program. Early learning programs include things like preschools, ECD centers, creches, and playgroups. We wanted the Thrive by 5 index sample to be representative of this large population of children. And so we randomly sampled over 5,000 children from 1,247 early learning programs across the country. Each of the little blue circles that you see on the screen represents a cluster of 3 early learning programs that were visited. This is the largest survey of early childhood outcomes that's ever been undertaken in South Africa. And in fact, we're leading the way globally with an initiative like this. Data collection took place between COVID waves, between September and November last year, under extraordinarily challenging conditions. Every single one of these 5,000 plus children was individually assessed in their mother tongue using tools that have been locally developed and standardized. These tools provide us with an accurate and a fair measure of whether children are on track for their age. So the data that we've collected gives us a window into the world of young children in South Africa today. The final weighted sample allows us to reliably report on the percentage of children aged 4 to 5 years who attend an early learning program, who are able to do age-appropriate tasks in key areas of development. You can view the information from the index nationally. You can also disaggregate it by provinces. You can look at how boys' performance compared to girls, and you can look at it by income quintile. Now, I only have 20 minutes today, so I am going to focus on the key national findings and the implications thereof. But I really encourage you to visit the Thrive by 5 website, where you'll be able to interact with the data. And there are also a number of reports on the website and action briefs for those of you who feel motivated to take action. Okay, so let's have a look at what we assessed. In our assessments of young children, we focused on areas of development that have been shown to be associated with successful transition into school, movement through school, completion of school, and ultimately success even beyond school. And we looked at 3 important domains of development. The first one we looked at is broad domain on early learning. Each child spent almost an hour with a trained assessor, and this trained assessor looked at the child's ability in 5 important areas: gross motor development, fine motor coordination and visual motor integration, numeracy and maths, emerging literacy and language, and cognition and executive functioning. Now, I'm sure for some of you, these terms are foreign. I will explain them a little bit later so that you understand their significance. What the tools allow us to do is to provide information on the percentage of children who are on track overall for early learning when you add these scores together, but it also enables us to present information on the proportion of children on track for each of these domains. And a little bit later when I share this, you'll see how significant this is. The second area that we looked at was the area of physical growth. Now here we used medical stadiometers to measure the height of a child. And what this tells us, when we compare the child's height to World Health Organization standards, it tells us whether the child is at risk of stunting. Stunting is a chronic condition that results from long-term malnutrition, which often starts in pregnancy and continues through early childhood. Children who are stunted are often developmentally delayed, both physically and cognitively. Now, height for age is not a comprehensive measure of child health, but it is a universally accepted one, and it is one that is possible to accurately assess in a survey of this scale. I'd just like to take a moment to acknowledge the Minister, welcome. I'm so glad you could make it. The third area that we looked at is the area of social emotional functioning. Now, the reason we looked at this is because there's a really strong evidence base to show that children who perform well in this domain will find the transition into school easier, and they'll be more able to benefit from the classroom activities and engagement with peers and with teachers. Now, as you can imagine, it's very difficult for a stranger to assess the social emotional functioning of a 4 to 5-year-old child. And so, for both physical growth and learning, we had assessors who independently evaluated the children. But for this domain, social emotional functioning, what we did was we asked each child's teacher to rate the child on a simple scale, which told us whether the child met the standard. And there were 2 elements to the scale. The one was looking at social relations with peer and adults, and the second one is emotional readiness for school. And this also included the child's level of age-appropriate independence. Now, before I dive into the findings, I just want to make one important observation. The index assessed children who are enrolled in early learning programs only because it was practically impossible to do anything else. We couldn't go house to house and assess 4 to 5-year-old children. We needed to find them somewhere. But when we talk about this, when we say we assess children in early learning programs, there's often an assumption that this index is about learning only, or it's about education. Please don't be tempted to see this as an education issue. A child's performance by the age of 4 to 5 years is the culmination of their experiences throughout their life. Did that child's mother have a healthy pregnancy? Does that child feel safe in her home? Does the child have access to good nutrition and health care? Do the caregivers of that child read to that child or tell her stories? Does she access a high-quality preschool? All of these experiences will shape the cognitive, physical, and emotional development of these children. So it stands to reason that no one sector or department can provide the full suite of services and support that young children need in their first 5 years. So as you engage with these findings, I really encourage you to think about the actions that you can take in your professional and personal capacities to help ensure that young children thrive by 5. This has to be a collective effort. This has to be a societal commitment. Okay, let's get into the data. This was the final sample of children that were the data that we analyzed. 5,139 children who were assessed in all the ways that I've just outlined. Enormous, enormous undertaking. Now, there are large statistical advantages to having such a big data set, but there is a disadvantage, is that we can get lost behind the numbers. We have to remember that these are 5,139 individual children with their own personalities, their own hopes and dreams for the future. So what I'd like to do to get started is to just pull us back a little bit. We can all imagine a child starting grade R. Now imagine a group of 20 children starting grade R in January 2023. These children are excited, they're anxious, it's their first time that they're going to big school. On the basis of the data that we've collected on these over 5,000 children, this is what we know about these 20 children. 7 of these children are likely to be ready. 7 of these children are likely to be thriving. These children are starting school on track. They have the physical, the cognitive abilities to be able to engage well in their classroom. They're more likely to start on track, to stay on track, and to complete their education. Of those 20 children, half, 10 of them, face barriers to thriving. These children start school already struggling, either because they're physically stunted or because they don't have the right learning foundations in place. These children are going to need additional support to catch up and to keep up. The remaining 3 children face significant barriers to thriving. These 3 children start school at a substantial disadvantage. They are physically stunted and they are falling behind cognitively. Considerable efforts will need to be made to support them, and many of them will be unlikely to ever catch up. Now, none of us want our child to be sitting in the orange or the red zone. But the fact is that 65% of 4 to 5-year-old children in South Africa are. Now I'm going to ask you to extrapolate this up again. About 1 million children start grade R every year. When you extrapolate this to that 1 million children, you get some sense of the scale, the enormity of the challenge that we face. This composite indicator that I've just presented included both the physical and the cognitive domains. And what I'm going to do now is unpack each of these in a little bit more detail. So let's start with the overall learning total. If you remember what I said earlier, we looked at 5 developmental areas, domains within overall learning. And what I'm going to present now is the sum of those domains. So each of the domains is scored out of 20, and we add them up to a score out of 100. Less than half of children aged 4 to 5 years in South Africa are on track for learning. These children fall into the green zone. They're able to do the tasks expected of children their age. 27% of children are falling behind. They're in the orange zone. These children will need support. And 28% of children are falling far behind when it comes to early learning specifically. Now, the main difference between the orange and the red zones, both of those are bad. The main difference between them is the degree of developmental delay and the level of intervention that's going to be needed to get them back on track. To understand this learning domain fully, it's really helpful to get into some of the detail of each domain. So let's go. So what you see here is the percentage of children who are on track, falling behind, and falling far behind in each of the 5 domains that we assessed. So as you'll see from there, the only domain in which more than 50% of young children are on track is early language and literacy. Very poor performance in those 3 domains where I've put the red exclamation marks is of great concern, given how important these domains are for school achievement. In particular, what you'll see from there is only 3 out of 10 children are in the green zone, on track, for emergent numeracy and mathematics, and for fine motor coordination and visual motor integration. Okay, I promised I would explain this term. So these skills are the skills that allow a child to coordinate their hand-eye movements, and they're really important for a young child. Think of the skills it takes to hold a pencil, to copy the outline of a letter or a shape. These are essential skills for learning reading, writing, and early maths. For all domains except gross motor development, boys performed on average worse than girls. And this is in line with the international literature. 10% less boys were on track than girls. Similarly, across all domains except gross motor development, poorer children scored less than their better off peers. Now, one of the things that we were really interested in is this question of how children perform across different income groups. We didn't have data on each child's household income. So what we did was we used school quintiles as a proxy. Now, for those of you who don't know the quintile system, every public school in South Africa is allocated a quintile rank based on the poverty levels of the community that school serves. So quintile 1, Q1, is the allocation to the schools serving the poorest communities, and then Q5 is for the richest, and then you have a gradient in between. So what we did was we allocated each of the early learning programs a quintile ranking based on the school that was closest to them. Now, this is by no means a perfect system, and we have additional data now which we'll be analyzing. But the data is good enough to show us that there's a clear socioeconomic gradient when it comes to learning outcomes. What you'll see on the x-axis, the Q1 to Q5, and the 2 lines represent children who are on track or not on track. The green is on track, and the red is not on track. And what you can see clearly is that as income levels at the household increase, so does a child's chance of being on track. So put simply, our index found that a child's chances of starting school on track is heavily influenced by the income level of the household they are born into. this feels deeply unjust. Of great concern are the high numbers of poor children who are falling far behind in key areas of development that are critical. And this was very clear in one domain, cognition and executive functioning. A child's ability to learn is heavily reliant on their cognition and executive functioning skills. Just to unpack this a little bit, these skills help a child to stay focused, to follow instructions, to think critically, and to problem solve. Very important skills for learning, and I think you'd all agree, very important skills for life. So what you see here is a comparison between the cognition and executive function scores of children in quintiles 1 and 5. The 3 bars on the left show quintile 1 children on track, falling behind and falling far behind, and the bars on the right show quintile 5 children. You can see from this that 2 out of 3 children in quintile 1 are unable to do the basic cognition and executive functioning skills required of a child their age. Without these skills, children from poor households are starting school at a distinct disadvantage. And what happens is that children fall further and further and further behind as they move through their education career, which means that the skills gap between rich children and poor children will continue to increase. If we want to reduce inequality in South Africa, we have to pay serious attention to this performance gap amongst children at the point of entry into school. The second domain we looked at, as I described earlier, is the area of physical growth. So for this domain, children are divided into 3 groups: those that have normal growth, those that have stunted growth, and those that have severely stunted growth. So what you see from this graph is the proportion of children with stunted growth and severely stunted growth in each province and nationally. You can see that 25% of children in South Africa aged 4 to 5 attending an early learning program have stunted growth. In other words, 1 in 4 children show signs of chronic malnutrition. Little exclamation marks I've put there. You can see those provinces are doing particularly badly. In those provinces, 30% or more children show signs of chronic malnutrition. The index looked at the relationship between different variables. So we looked at, for example, does stunting change learning outcomes? And what we found was that stunted children performed worse on the early learning assessments than their non-stunted counterparts, which we expect to see from the extensive literature on this. They start out with lower learning scores at age 50 months, and this difference persists as they get older. The negative impact of stunting on the human capital of South Africa cannot be overemphasized. This is a preventable condition, and it comes with devastating personal and societal costs. The third important area of development we looked at, social emotional functioning. So here, as I said, we used 2 rating scales, and children who scored above a certain threshold were considered to be meeting the standard. Now, what you can see from here is that children performed a lot better in this area than they did in others. Most children were rated by their teachers as meeting the standard. 32% of boys and 23% of girls did not meet the standard for social relations with peers and adults. What does this mean practically? Well, these children will struggle to cooperate with peers. They might struggle to resolve problems without using aggression and to seek support from familiar adults. For emotional readiness for school, children did a little worse here. 37% of boys did not meet the standard, and 30% of girls. These children will struggle with age-appropriate levels of independence, struggle to express their needs and their feelings, to adjust to change, and to initiate activities. And once again, like stunting, we looked at the relationship between this indicator and learning outcomes. And what we found was that social emotional functioning had a surprisingly large effect on learning outcomes. Children who met the standard for social emotional functioning performed better overall. This really highlights the importance of paying attention to the social and emotional needs of young children during their first 5 years of life. Now, these risks tend to cluster. So the combination of risk factors faced by young children in South Africa place some children at a massive disadvantage. This is what we found from the data, by way of example. By the age of 4 years, a child in the lowest income group who is severely stunted is developmentally already 1 whole year behind a child of normal growth from a wealthiest income group when it comes to early learning. This child has very little chance of catching up. He is less likely to find school, and he's less likely to be employed. By letting our children fall behind before they even start school, we are setting them up for failure. And we are placing an unmanageable burden on the education system. Poor children who have poor learning outcomes will be going to poor schools who do not have remedial resources, and the challenge will simply be exacerbated. Inequalities in early childhood reinforce intergenerational cycles of poverty and exclusion in South Africa. I think this statement should be repeated. Inequalities in early childhood reinforce intergenerational cycles of poverty and exclusion in South Africa. There is no way we will achieve our development goals of eliminating poverty and reducing inequality in South Africa if only 35% of children are set up for success. If we want a healthy nation and an inclusive economy, we must address barriers to thriving that most children face in their earliest years. And we can. The first 5 years of human development are the most important. The brain is rapidly developing, and the neural pathways are being laid down for life. This makes this a time of enormous vulnerability, but also of incredible opportunity. We have evidence to show that young children in South Africa respond really well when they're given the opportunity to learn. We also have really encouraging data from this index to show that poor outcomes for poor children are not inevitable. There are children in quintile 1 who are outperforming their peers. There are children who thrive despite income poverty. Data from these outliers offers us really valuable insights into the kind of solutions we should be scaling. While the elimination of child poverty must remain a national priority, there is so much we can do, even in the midst of poverty, to ensure that more children are set up for success. Now, today has been about sharing the data, but data really is just a means to an end. It's not going to actually change anything. Nothing will change unless we become the change makers. The well-being of our children is our collective responsibility. There are small and big, important things that each of us can do in our homes, in our communities, in our places of work, and in our spheres of influence. And we must do them. And there are some transformative things that require collective action. We have to accelerate access to high-quality early learning opportunities for every single child within home and early learning programs. Early learning currently receives less than 2% of the annual education budget, reaching just 13% of poor children. Greater and smarter investment in early learning programs will make a tangible difference to child outcomes, especially for the poorest children. And this will have a positive ripple effect through the education system. And we have to eliminate stunting. Stunting in a country like ours is unforgivable. The productivity losses incurred as a result of South Africa's terrible stunting rates are staggering. A nutritional safety net for young children is essential for building our human capital. These health and nutrition interventions have to start from pregnancy. And how will we know if we are successful? Well, we'll repeat data collection. We'll repeat the Thrive by 5 data collection every 3 years to track our progress and to hold ourselves accountable. And we will use this data, 2021 index data, as our baseline. There's a popular proverb that goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is now. It will take us a long time to see the economic benefits of our increased investments in early childhood. But we know if we take concrete actions now, it is not inconceivable to imagine that we could be standing here in a few years' time, presenting data on the percentage of children in South Africa who thrive by 5, and telling a very different story. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Sonia for sharing those insights with us, but how are we feeling? Yeah, raised eyebrows, changing your position in your seat slightly. It's a reality shock, right? And perhaps we shouldn't be too shocked because we do see the ripple effects of the lack of investment that we've made in early childhood development, in the latter part of youth development, and of course, once we look for skills and individuals to actually participate in the economic environment. But the truth is now we have the numbers, and as we have to work on is access, unpacking where these misconnections are coming from, and of course making sure that the necessary investment, partnership and participation is something that we do leverage on. So whilst the data perhaps might be uncomfortable to accept, it is our reality. And fundamentally, we need to shift that needle to make sure that we build the reality that we look for. As mentioned, it will take a while. It will take some significant changes, but some clear objectives as well as to what we can do as key players in society and of course, as leaders of our households as well. In my mind, I'm already questioning, should I still be asking about eyes, ears, nose, and mouth at 5, or taking it beyond that and maybe stimulating coding? But I guess these are some of the themes and concepts that we need to discuss as to how do we as adults in the room actually interact with children under the age of 5, because that is actually going to unpack the practical outcomes that we're looking for. But on that note, we know that it's a long journey that we're embarking upon. It's a challenging one, but one that still has some favorable fruits and outcomes that we can still look forward to. Our next speaker today will give us some perspective from government's point of view. No doubt we are well aware that government, together with the private sector, continue to invest quite heavily in the development of both healthcare and primarily education to ensure that we're able to cultivate a culture and an environment where we have a human population that is able to thrive. To give us a perspective and, of course, share her point of view, please warmly welcome our speaker to share her keynote address this morning, the Honourable Minister of Basic Education in the Republic of South Africa, Honourable Minister Angie Motshekga.
Thank you very much, Kelebo. Program Director, let me start off by giving my most sincere apologies for arriving late. We had a district conference in KZN and district awards last night, and there was just delays with flights coming from Natal, so we had almost 2 hours delay. So I was sitting at the airport, I was just not being late, so my sincere apologies. But thanks to technology, I was able to also listen through some of the speeches on my way here. So let me start off by acknowledging the Consul General of the U.S. Embassy, Vincent Spera. Thank you very much for ongoing support. I met the CEO of FNB on my way in here, but also had the opportunity to listen to his entire speech on my way here. Let me really thank him in advance. Thank Sipho Silinda from FNB Public Banking Sector, Andrew Klaas from USAID. Thank you very much for ongoing support. Nicole Biandi, Head of Communication and Marketing of Innovation Edge. Sonja, I don't know whether I read it in English or Gise or Gise, so it's going to sound one of the two Gise. Also, it says South African one. Okay. The project lead, Thrive by 5 Index, our senior officials from government, members of the ECD sector, our business partners in particular, because indeed they've been really supporting us, and more important, they've been keeping this sector alive for all the years. So I really want to thank them most sincerely. Ladies and gentlemen, indeed, thank you very much for this opportunity. It means a lot to us as a sector. We're very excited, especially as basic education, to have been part of rebuilding what we think, or what we see as an integrated, consolidated, realigned ECD education and put ECD at the center of everything that we do. And that's what I also shared with the district directors, because I think the last speaker was quite correct. It is just a major task to get our kids back on track when we have really neglected the early foundations of learning. We have extra classes, we have Saturday classes, we have everything else. We put so much resources in trying to compensate for gaps. And I was saying to district directors, if we focus on the foundations for learning, we will have our Saturdays, we'll have our holidays, we don't have to go to morning classes. We have all the things that we put in place to try and compensate, because our foundations for learning are extremely weak, and it takes so much on. I would just take such a toll. I sometimes look at these young teachers and say, they just don't have a life. They have to be at school in the morning, they have to stay later, they have to do Saturday classes, we have to throw in resources. And indeed, I'm very excited that as a country, I think we did a pause and we're going back to where it all matters, which is our early foundations, and have a solid foundation for all of us. So I'm very grateful about that. I heard the program director said you can expect a thriving tree if you have not looked after the roots. And I always say to my officials, the size of your foundation determines the size of your house, the height of your house. It determines anything. So you can't even go higher if your foundations are weak. You can't expand if foundations are weak. So even the size of the house and the height it goes, it depends on the foundation. And unless we can sort out things there, we're going to stay in small houses. We're going to stay in houses which can grow higher, and we really will be struggling. We'll have to patch and put other houses around the house because we can't do much, because this foundation is not solid enough to give us good foundations. So indeed, Program Director, we're gathered here today, again, because of the visionary leadership of FNBC, Jakes. I had an opportunity to listen to him on my way here, and want to thank him in absentia for his kind words. And the brain trust of the people at Innovation Edge, because they steered the research ship to produce the first of its kind Thrive by 5 Index, 2021. And as a sector, we want to humbly acknowledge the generous support from our partners from the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, and ECD measure. And we do not take any of the support we get from the private sector, from our international partners, social partners for granted. We continue to be very grateful and appreciative of all the support that they give us as a sector. Indeed, your contribution goes a long way in cementing the foundations for a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, united, and prosperous society based on justice, equality, and fundamental human rights. And indeed, for us as the governing party, this is very important, because even from the word go at the center, we said we want to prioritize education. I remember President Mande was asked at some stage, what are the priorities of your government? He said, no, priority number 1 is education. They said 2, he said, is education. The third priority is education. So we had committed ourselves. So it's not just a slogan that we really want. We believe that doing the best in education will help us to really reach some of our objectives, as I say, of a democratic, non-racial, non-sexist, and a prosperous country. And we really think education will help us to reach those objectives. We have continuously endeavored to build an equal society, right the wrongs of the past, and heal the wounds of the past that are as instructed by our Constitution. It really warms my heart to address this Thrive by 5 Index 2021 launch that seeks to paint a picture of the critical developmental milestones for our children by the time they turn 5. The Thrive by 5 Index constitutes the first baseline in a series of nationally and provincially representative surveys that will help us monitor trends over time in proportions of our children aged between 4 and 5 years who are on track for their key areas of development. Furthermore, we believe that the index provides us with a starting point to measure against which to monitor the progress in improving the quality of learning services for our children over time and allowing us to intervene timelessly to get children back on track. Because indeed, as we were taking the responsibility from social development, the big question was going to be different. What is it that we are going to do different from what social development is doing? And this helps us to really have the necessary tools and benchmarks against which we can measure or even develop our own programs, which we think are going to be the programs that will help us to realign, to strengthen, and develop ECD programs in our country. For me, this is indeed a historic occasion, because until now, we did not have any national data to track the critical developmental indicators of our children before grade R. The Thrive by 5 Index provides us with a measure of service quality and child outcomes when this function shift occurs. Which reminds me to always make a point, because people sometimes think we cheat when they measure our matric results to say these are the kids who came in grade 1, and you came with so many. I said, no, start grade 2. And they don't understand why we say don't start with grade 1, because we know they come not ready. So some of them only start being school ready at grade 1. Because sometimes it's trying to say, how does a grade 1 child fail? What is it that they really, they've not been banking school? Parents scream to say, how does a grade 1 fail unless we're not doing your work? So my child was not truant, because we know normally kids are failed because they're truant. But the main issue that a grade 1, sometimes you find that that's the first time we're able to, or children just to get that year to be school ready, which already is a waste of their lives. They arrive at school at 7, they're not ready for school. And that's why, as I say, we always count our matric output from grade 2, not grade 1. Right? And these researchers, when I say to them, don't cry. And I think it's only people in ECD who will understand that by the time our children arrive at school, they're not school ready, so we can't even count them. So it's only when they're in grade 2 that we feel they have been school ready, and then we start counting from there, and they say, Minister is cheating. I said, what for? I mean, I give you the statistics, how many, we are the ones who keep the statistics of how many children were admitted. We're the ones who issue the statistics, how many children sat for matric. Why should I really want to manipulate information for what? I mean, there's nothing to gain from it, but it's for us to share and understand what are the interventions that we need to do. So I'm very excited that this index is going to provide us with measures of service quality and child outcomes when this function shift occurs. Started in April, we've agreed that for the first year, to allow a smooth transition, we'll keep most of the systems in place, but we have to make sure that in between this year and next year, we do all the necessary preparatory work in terms of content, in terms of substance, and in terms of programs. And it will help us with monitoring and reporting trends over time to ensure greater accountability. We will definitely use that information to say this year, having done the following interventions, we're seeing the needle moving or it's not moving, we've tried the following. So it really helps us to measure, to have a reliable instrument through which we will use to measure if there's any progress and if our interventions are yielding results, or if they're not, if we have to change strategies. We have resolved as government, which has been an old decision that really we've not been able to put on track, and I'm very excited that finally the function shift from social development to education has occurred. Program that I had the privilege, really people have been serving long in education. I was also an MEC for social development in Gauteng. And know the infrastructure of social development, that to carry all by itself such an important function is not easy and it's not possible. Social development functions, we used to function through NGOs. It's a very different structure. But if you want to carry your children, you want to, a very safe, safe. And we just do feel that education has a good footprint, it has the infrastructure, and it's international trends that early childhood development must come to education. I always repeat the story of my conversation with the Minister of Seychelles when we went for SADC assessments, because Seychelles always come tops. And I was saying to the minister then, Minister, what do you think, what are the things that you do that really helps so that year after year in your assessments, your country comes on top? And the first question she asked me to say, when do your children start schooling? I said, at 6. She says, oh, you won't catch us, you're 3 years behind. It says, we start them long before as the education department. By the time we teach them formally, we've done all remediation, we've identified where the problems are, and by the time they go to the classroom, we teach them how to read and write. We know which children have motor coordination difficulties, which children have serious learning disabilities from the word go, and by the time they really start the formal schooling, we have weeded, because I don't want to say weeded because it's like there's some debt, but we have cleared the ground. We have prepared them adequately for them to enter schooling. She says it doesn't matter what you do, you can throw as much resources in your education system. Unless you strengthen your foundations, there is no way you'll catch us at Seychelles. Never. And indeed, that's why I say I'm very excited that as a department, and I think we're committed as government, that we have shifted responsibility, which is an international trend, from social development to basic education, to really create a very solid structure. We visited your country, Ambassador. It was only one state, and all your states have ECD under education. It was only, I think it's Maryland, the only state which had ECD as part of social development, but all your other states have it in education. So in other words, it is also a foundation for an inclusive economy, which I think came out, and also a just society. And the timing for this report couldn't be more perfect, as it comes just 7 days after we assumed the complete coordination, integration, and consolidation of early childhood development under basic education. So as I explained the function of the function shift 7 days ago, I said, this is the beginning of a better future for our children. And it's a beginning of really getting the whole, and I think even the structure of government is very helpful. It's an integrated program. We know as basic education, we can't do it on our own. We rely on all other parts of government. We rely on social development, we rely on police, we rely on health, our researchers, on our institutions, our NGOs, and this is, I think, the real time when we can say as a country, we're ready as a village, or we have prepared the meal for the village to come and raise its children. Okay. Whatever. There must be something, so maybe I have to clear my nose, but I know I have a weeping eye. In Tswana we say, "Wana sijo watakane." That to raise a child, so it's not only the proverb which says it takes a village to raise a child, but in Tswana we say, "Wana sijo watakane." You as a child, you all have to put your hands together. Everybody has to come together to raise the child. And with this ECD program, I'm very excited that we have partners like yourselves who are helping us with research. We have business partners. We have NGOs in the sector coming to the party. So Sijo is food. So we say, child is like a meal. We all have to join hands to get them. So as government, we are prepared to really provide a bouquet of services to meet the needs of our children. We're mindful of ensuring that all children in South Africa should be developmentally be on track before even starting school. We'll need to collaborate between multiple government departments, our social partners. In the main, we are aware that we have to work, as I said, as education, higher education, to prepare also our ECD practitioners as health, social development, treasury also, planning and monitoring, including your home affairs. Isn't it that we are a signatory of Charter for the Rights of Children, that they have the right to a name, they have the right to safety, and through this we really hope that we'll be able to integrate all the necessary services that are supposed to be given to children. And obviously we know we cannot complete talking about early childhood development without mentioning the general support that we get from our partners. But I'm also very happy that this inaugural Thrive by 5 Index launch, it does strengthen our belief in strong partnerships for the growth in basic education, as referenced by the NDP. It will also help us when we have to report on our NDP on a Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 4.2.1. It will help us also to really have scientific indicators against which we are going to be able to report. It will also help us to collect data, because to collect data when there's a framework, it does help also. And it will also enable us to track progress. As I said, it will help us to track progress in increasing the proportion of children who are developmentally on track by the time they reach our schools or are in grade R or by the time they are 5. I do believe that it's a critical building block in our quest to roll out a new reimagined early childhood development sector, and I don't think there's a better way to building a future than focusing on early learning foundations. Because early childhood development, I think as the report was saying, it's also a foundation for cognitive development by its nature. I remember when we were launching the campaign on reading, and I had lots of volunteers to say, you say children can't read, so can we want to volunteer to come teaching? And these are readers and just people who read, who link words. And when I interrogate to say, do you understand what are problems? And they just don't understand that it's not just linking words that you can pronounce the word man is eating. It's actually issues of cognitive development that were saying our kids can't read with meaning. So they were volunteering to come and reading aloud to children, not necessarily understanding what is our underlying problem in the reading challenges that we have in schools. And sometimes it sounded rude to say, we have to go and train you first on how to. I said, no, I can read. I said, no, we have to train you first on how you can help us in reading for meaning. Because people just didn't understand also this cognitive development factor that we're talking about. Indeed, yesterday, when we were in the district conference with the district directors in Durban, we said to them, and I said to them, as a sector, we're very privileged. We're a big sector, we get a good budget, we have well-qualified people. I mean, the people that we're awarding with doctors, and really innovative and creative people. And I said, we have an opportunity to use the power of basic education to bridge the gaps between urban and rural, to bridge the gaps between the poor and the rich, in terms of race, also in terms of black and white, between boys and girls, and finally between the rich and poor. And I still have to prove this story about boys lagging behind, to say what makes them lag behind to girls. And my theory is that we don't teach them to be responsible from an early age. They have back rooms, they don't clean, they don't have responsibilities. So as a result, it also affects their growth and development as children. They are not given responsibilities quite early. You know, in black cultures, there are men. I had a visitor from Limpopo, and I was saying, you must wash the dishes. He says, how can I wash dishes when there are so many women? And I could see that he's including me. I'm part of these women he's referring to that have to wash dishes. And how do I dare say he must wash dishes? So it could be also this question of many women that they see, including grannies and aunties, that they must wash dishes for them. So I do believe that indeed it is a new dawn for early childhood development. It gives us a second chance to deal head-on with the intergenerational poverty, the rising inequalities that are rooted in our past and which will not eradicate until we can sort the foundations, our early foundations. We are alive to the fact that there are massive inequalities that persist in our country and which are taken intergenerationally. They're just a revolving door. We know that poor children are more likely to live in poor households with poor access to early health care and nutrition and limited resources to learning. And we are also aware that they are less likely to even access early learning programs. And as such, from the word go, they start from a weak start. We want to focus our hearts on the problem in a quest to improve learning outcomes by concentrating on the crucial first 5 years of learning. Because we do believe that the first 5 years of life, that's when the human growth, development, physically and otherwise, because if people are stunted physically, it doesn't help to feed them later. It don't make any difference. So we have to sort it out when the problem even begins at the early developmental stage. And we also, from our experiences, know that early childhood development shapes the architecture of the growth, both mentally and physically. And in Guni, we say the gochwal semanzi. So you bend a tree when it's still wet. Otherwise, you can't, it will break. You build better people when they're still children. But sometimes it's impossible, if sometimes not difficult, to mend a broken person. When they're serial rapists, their work now is to rotate, to revolve around prison. So the best thing is to invest in building better children so that you don't have the burden of having to fix broken men and women, because sometimes it's impossible to fix it by the time they get to that stage. And for me, this also helps us in that sense that we have to make sure that we really don't find ourselves with mosaics. Sometimes they even, if they're broken, they become dangerous even in your hands if you try to touch them, if they're already broken glasses. So we have to preserve and make sure that indeed. So today, the Thrive by 5 index results for us are a watermark occasion. At the outset, the index gives us a bird's eye view of the prospects and complexities of the early learning landscape. So, Program Director, I am pleased to say the index has practical utility for early learning in the early learning sector. We will use the Thrive by 5 index to improve the quality of ECD programs in various ways. These include our ECD practitioners' development. The data will help us prioritize practitioners' development to address the domain-specified concerns such as numeracy. Also on curriculum matters, the data will inform enhancements of our curriculum. It's helping us to offer insights into whether differentiated strategies might be needed to address developmental concerns for boys and girls, as you've indicated. It also helps us with the regulatory and compliance system of the ECD program, the registration, the monitoring of policies, and the alignment and the integration that we are seeking to do. We're quite aware, for instance, that government spends almost 1 to 2% of government's annual budget of education goes to ECD, and it only reaches 13% of children who are deserving to be in those programs. So there are huge problems around access, disparities, which we have to address. But interestingly, I believe that the data will help us identify strategic opportunities, again, for public-private partnerships in ensuring that government and non-governmental funders allocate resources adequately. It will improve also on our side accountability. It will also help to offer insights into the bridging programs that are necessary. And these I think from the report it came clear, these will be social, economic, and also physical challenges or specific interventions that we're supposed to do. So Program Director, our work is really cut to change the trajectories of poor South African children who fall behind in their educational milestones even before they enter the classroom. There is no conceivable way in which we can realize our developmental goals of eliminating income poverty, reducing inequalities, without addressing the significant challenges that our children face in their earlier years. We have to tackle the injustice of unequal opportunities in early education spaces. and we must, with urgency, decrease the gap between young children in the richest and poorest households at the point of entry in our schools. And we must increase the percentage of young children in our country who thrive by 5, setting more children up for success. So in conclusion, Program Director, I want to thank again the research team, our partners, both, as I say, who funded the program, as I've mentioned them before, our partners, both international, local, our private partners, but also our ongoing partners in the NGO and the private sector, that indeed this index gives us hope and a clear roadmap into the future. And again, we want to extend our gratitude to our sponsors, our partners, local and international partners, and researchers for your service to the nation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you kindly to the Minister of Basic Education for sharing her perspective and details as well, and making it very practical for us as South Africans to fully understand that government is committed. Yes, there are concerns, but of course we are all aligned in making sure that this remains a collaborative effort. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to shift gears now and participate in an interactive panel discussion. This is where we have key players and role players within the realm of boosting and bolstering many of our goals and objectives in improving access to early childhood development, especially when it comes to ensuring that the quality is equitable right across various classes of society. I welcome my panelists, 5 of them, one of whom will be joining us virtually. They'll join me on stage to take their seats, but we are not excluding you from the conversation, and I do see a few of you have already actively been tweeting. A reminder that the hashtag is #ThriveBy5. I do see that many of our partners are online and engaged, so please continue to share some of the messaging and insight there. But this panel discussion will have 30 minutes of seeking and soliciting solutions to some of the outcomes that have been highlighted, and you will be allowed to participate in a Q&A segment. So if there are any questions here in the room as well as online, we will be able to take them virtually and process your questions. A reminder that given that we are slightly tight for time, we do ask that you keep your questions short, concise, and of course directed to one specific speaker on the panel that you'd like to address when we do get to the Q&A. But your hand has been noted, ma'am. We'll make sure that the microphone starts with you. On that note, allow me to welcome our panelists who will be joining us on stage, taking a seat on the chair, second to my left-hand side. We'd like to start off by introducing Usipho Silinda, the CEO of FNB Public Sector Banking, joining us this morning. Mr. Silinda is a financing and banking executive with more than 20 years of experience within the banking sector. Feel free to make your way to the stage. As we welcome them all, we'll enjoy final applause for all the speakers as they come on board, ladies and gentlemen. Followed by Ms. Kulula Manona, who is the Chief Director of Foundations for Learning at the Department of Basic Education. She's also one of the champions for the National Reading Coalition, established to mobilize learning and education. Please have a seat on that end, please, ma'am. Have a seat on the next one. Thank you. Ms. Isabella, before we get to Ms. Isabella, we have Ms. Mastura Sadan. Ms. Sadan is the Chief Social Sector Expert at the Department for Monitoring, Planning and Evaluation. She has close to 2 decades of senior management experience within the South African government, and she'll be joined as well by our last but not least next speaker who joins us, Ms. Leslie Bamford. Dr. Bamford is a medical doctor and specialist in child, youth and school health, as well as acting chief director at the National Department of Health, with extensive experience in overseeing the services aimed at children under 5. These are our panelists joining us live, but we have one more joining us virtually, Ms. Isabella Sekwawana, acting Deputy Director General of Welfare Services, which includes the social welfare of children under the age of 5 at the Department of Social Development. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome all my panelists with warm applause. A little louder is also fine. I think there's a great sense of excitement that we have. So perhaps if we could welcome them one more time with a resounding level of applause. There we go. Thank you very much for your cooperation, ladies and gentlemen. And I say that because I do see that we are proud of our colleagues and their participation on the panel and motivating them to give us robust answers and solutions to the questions that we have here today. 30 minutes, quick fire, and I think one thing that is quite clear to all of you as panelists, again, thank you so much for joining us and actively participating. But as we look to solicit solutions, we've certainly highlighted some of the challenges. We're well aware of the problem statement that we're facing here in the country and are looking to address them. And perhaps we need to reflect on the images of those 20 children that Sonia had illustrated in the presentation earlier, that 13 of them are at risk, potential of being left behind. And that underscores the messaging of one of the grounding statements that we heard earlier this morning of 65% of children between the ages of 4 and 5 who are not thriving and meeting some of their targets in terms of growth as well as literacy development. And I'm keen as we shift towards finding some solutions in terms of unpacking some of the themes that we do need to explore that could perhaps assist us in finding some recommendations here and solutions to addressing this challenge. Starting with yourself, Sipho, taking advantage of the fact that you are the rose today among many other roses. Your solutions, perhaps, that we can look to implement to make sure that we can ensure that children under the age of, or between the ages of 4 and 5 are able to thrive. From your perspective as a representative of the private sector, what needs to be done?
Ladies and gentlemen, what time is it now? Still good morning. Good morning, and thanks, Minister. It's a pleasure. And the consulate. I must say that let's first acknowledge the importance and the complexity of this ECD. It's not an easy task for all of us. But let's also say to ourselves that different stakeholders must actually come together and each must play to their strengths. So us in private sector, I have to say upfront, and I hope my other private sector peers would follow suit, that we do have resources and we do have capabilities. And if we deploy them, I think we can make an impact at scale. And from an F&B perspective, how we approach this, it's through our business and through our foundations. Mm-hmm. I'll just be practical a little bit. So if you look what the foundation has been doing, it has supported policy development, which resulted, ladies and gentlemen, in the grant, in the disbursement of the grant, or for example, the establishment of the grant itself, the conditional grant. The other piece that is important for us, we have shifted the gears and start to focus on the mind stimulation. And we believe that by funding the ECD teachers, we can make a different impact. So that is the foundational side of things. Mm-hmm. Now let's come to the business, because that's where you get scale. I think Jack has touched on it. Through our digital platform, if you bank with F&B, you can go to NevCare. The reason why we've activated that, we want to allow our own employees, 45,000 of them, plus our customers, 7 million of them, to adopt an ECD center with a pure intention that go and look at it, support it in terms of their needs, and you can even donate. And that is just using our platform from an F&B perspective.
Got you.
Lastly, it's through this collaboration and investment that we are talking about today, that if we do such things, I think as a country we can go somewhere on this topic.
And I started with you deliberately because, as we know, you're a member of the private sector, but of course led by public policy, right, that we get from government. At the same time, being a financial services institution, you're at the coalface of witnessing the economic activity on the ground. So these themes of inequality, income disparities that we witness are themes that the bank also has direct access to, and we're glad that we are soliciting some solutions to that. Mr. Perhaps if I can come to you to get your clarity and perspective there, given that you do sit on the Planning Commission, we're well aware that 2030 is not too far away. We still have targets and objectives to meet in that regard. In the same line, the NDP is still aligned with SDG specifically 4, which looks to ensure that we actually allow access to quality education for all. Where are we missing the mark to make sure that the next 7 years we can actually shift the gears in making sure that we change the status quo regarding Thrive by 5 at the moment?
Yes, thank you. You know, the goal, of course, of the NDP, the goals rather, is to eradicate poverty by 2030. That is, you know, using the lower income bound poverty line. And then, of course, also to reduce inequality by 2030. And so the question is, what do we do today to get to those goals in 2030? And as you correctly say, there's 8 years left. And so the important thing is to understand, you know, the data that we've just seen today is, of course, quite depressing, right? And it tells us that whilst we've increased access to ECD, the quality remains the big challenge. And so how are we going to address not only access issues, because there are still children who are excluded, but how are we going to address the quality issues? And then I think almost more importantly is the early intervention. And, you know, the point, again, about stunting, the high rates of stunting in South Africa, is to look at the health services, but not narrowly health, but also the psychosocial aspects of that should be introduced into our health service. So it's focusing on the early years in addition to improving quality.
And that's quite important. I'd like to come to you as well here, Leslie, just to get further focus in terms of unpacking the needs of the system, stunting being mentioned a number of times. And as we know, as the Department of Health, another key lever that we need to pull at in order to address this. From your point of view and your perspective, if we could shift the needle today, what are some of the fundamentals that we should address?
So thank you very much. I think looking from a health perspective, we focus very much on the very early childhood, the first 1,000 days. I'm sure everyone here is aware that the first 1,000 days is the period from conception to 2 years of age, is exactly 1,000 days. And we do, during that period, the health sector has a very important role to play, because in establishing child well-being, early childhood development, health and nutrition are very critical in that very early period. Now, I think it's important to understand where the health sector comes from, both internationally and in South Africa, that for many years we've had a large focus on what we call child survival, maternal and child survival, making sure that mothers and children survive, and we have measured ourselves looking at maternal mortality ratios, under 5 mortality rates, and globally and in South Africa, we've made good progress in reducing those rates. That work is not finished, and we need to keep our eye on that ball. However, we increasingly, as I say, on a global level and in South Africa, understand that we have a broader responsibility to make sure that children also thrive. And we have for ourselves defined the 2 outcomes that we're looking at as stunting and school readiness.
Got you.
And so it's really important that we now have a way of measuring that. What do we need to do as the health sector to contribute towards those outcomes? So about 5 years ago, we started on a journey where we're trying to shift the paradigm and say, what is it that we as the health sector need to do to support caregivers to provide the full range of services that children need to thrive? We focus it on 5 areas. We say there are 5 things that children need to thrive. They need good nutrition, which starts with breastfeeding. They need love, play, and talk. It was quite a paradigm shift for us to start talking about love, because we as healthcare workers, we provide interventions to children like immunization. We're very comfortable with that. Talking about love interaction is new territory for us. Children need to be protected from diseases and injury through immunization. They need access to healthcare services, and some children need extra care. Now, we're trying to take our health system on a journey to move from a position where we provide services to a position where we support our families to provide that full range of care, because we believe that that is the critical step to making sure that children thrive and that are prepared, even at that very early age, to benefit first from ECD programs and later from more formal education.
I want to jump in there because it does seem as though there's again cohesiveness in terms of the collaboration that we're trying to underscore here today when it comes to social development, the love that you speak to, making sure that there are interventions and shifting it back to the first 1,000 days. And that's when you start then exploring into the realm of, okay, if we're not just looking at thriving by 5, we actually need to also address societal issues that lead to pregnancy, planned, unplanned, teenage or otherwise. And perhaps, Isabella, this is where we can come to you to share some of your perspective from the social development point of view in terms of some of the additional interventions that might be required here to adequately address these needs to ensure that we can literally shift the status quo. Help us unpack some of the commitments that have been made by the Department of Social Development in this regard here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Let me take this opportunity to acknowledge the presence of Minister Motshekga and the consulate from the USAID. You know, we've got a very good policy that has been developed, you know, to guide the provision of services to children, especially in the area of early childhood development. And in that policy, it is very clear in terms of the comprehensive package of services that needs to be provided, but also the essential core package of services. And in the essential core package of services, there are 4 packages that have been identified. The first one is health. The second one is food and nutrition. The third one is social protection, and that's where we come in as the Department of Social Development. And the fourth one is early learning. Now, in terms of the social protection, we're looking at issues of child protection themselves, because when you talk about children, you know, the issue of child protection is very critical. For us, the best interest of a child is at a center of each and every interventions that we are coming up with. Like, for example, you know, every worker has to be vetted, you know, before he or she can be involved with a child. And that's why we've got a National Child Protection Register that we are responsible for, to ensure that, you know, all those people who are taking care of children are well vetted and they are fit, you know, to take care of children. But also from the side of the department, when we talk about social protection, we know that when a child is born, he has a right to identity, and therefore this child has to be registered for him or her to qualify to get, you know, the social grant, because we know as a country we've got a very comprehensive social security system, and we are therefore, you know, providing social grants to these children. Now, having said that, I'm of the opinion that, you know, as I said earlier, our policy is very clear. The only thing that we other colleagues have spoken about is about how resources that we need to invest, you know, for our children. And in terms of investing resources, we are quite aware of the limitations that we are having with regard to resources, especially as government. But we are saying that, as one speaker has already said, there's a lot of resources within the country. But the only issue that we have to really focus on is the issue of collaboration, the issue of cooperation, the issue of coordination, and the issue of ensuring that we share a common vision and we begin to implement, instead of only focusing on coming up with documents, but also having a focus and a way of trying to track, you know, in terms of the progress that we have made. And I'm quite excited that this exercise that has been done today, the milestone that we are launching today, it's one of the issues that are going to assist us in terms of having a basis for us to be able, you know, to track on progress. And it don't help us to come again after 3 years, you know, to do the same exercise without having been able, you know, to deal with the institutional arrangements, you know, that will make us to ensure that we really make stride and progress in terms of ensuring that, you know, we improve, you know, on the thriving of our children. So it is very much important that we should cooperate, we should collaborate, we should coordinate, we should ensure ensure that, we work towards one common vision and not apply a piecemeal in terms of the resources that we are coming up with. We should really even have, something.
I'm going to jump in just to allow one of your colleagues to add some perspective on that particular thought there. But as you say, collaboration and the participation is certainly what we need. And we are seeing some remnants of that, not only with the representatives here on the panel, but of course, some of the movements that have been made in terms of shifts in some policy direction. And perhaps, Kulula, you can also come in here to share some of your thoughts, given the opening remarks that have already been made by some of your peers and counterparts here on the panel this morning. But again, you as a representative from the Department of Education, literacy was mentioned. The Minister even gave us some perspective as to reading beyond just, I guess, reciting words, but really in terms of comprehension and even educating the practitioners. Your perspective here as to what might be required to shift the needle.
Indeed, thank you very much. And I do want us to really acknowledge the groundwork that has been laid by social development in terms of this integrated function. And I could understand how passionate Isabella was talking about the need for us to collaborate and the need for us to coordinate this massively integrated function. And to Sipo's point as well, and I think it is the running theme that we're seeing, the importance of that integrated understanding and understanding that ECD is really cross-functional. And I think it was the very same theme that we were presenting actually and really promoting when we took over this function on the 1st of April. Talking about the groundwork that has already been laid, there is a collaborative framework. It is in that policy that has just been mentioned. Yeah. And that framework now, what we need to do is for us to look at what it is that we can do better as the Department of Basic Education and not think that nothing has been done. And think about what are the things that we need to be creative and to innovate around. There has been, through the results of the index, an evidence that shows us that when it comes to literacy, emergent literacy, our children are better off in terms of attaining those outcomes. But now what do we need to do to ensure that we sustain those gains that we already see through the results of the index? I do think that having been presented with data that shows that our children are sitting at 3 varying points, we need, as they will be coming over to start their schooling careers, we need to think about them in those 3 degrees that they are sitting at. We have those children, there are very few we know, who are developmentally on track. So in terms of programming, particularly from grade R, that is what should inform us, that evidence, that those who are on track, how do we ensure that we sustain and extend them? And then we have children who are sitting at 2 degrees of gaps in terms of the barriers that have been shown here. And I think what we need to be focusing on is designing programs that will be able to target those different gaps that the children are really experiencing. There has been mention also through Minister of the importance of ensuring that we validate and we ensure that we support the journeys. When I'm talking about the journeys, I'm talking about the professional development journeys of the practitioners who actually support these children. We have to think of the parents who live with these children, the caregivers who really are there to give the love that Leslie was talking about to these children. And then our programming has to ensure that we take all of that into account. But just before I can see you are eager. Leslie spoke about the work that has been done in terms of laying the foundations, in terms of nutrition as well. Yes. And I think as the Department of Basic Education, we have a critical role to play there. One of the values that we are bringing is that we already have a well-tested architecture through our National School Nutrition Program, and those are the innovations now about things that we can do differently that we are starting to think about. How do we extend that and model it such that it actually fits within the context of ECD?
You're quite right. And I'm going to stick with you for just a moment because you touched on a very important theme, which is the practitioners. And nutrition will come to as well, just to further distill some more insight on that particular note. But for many South African households, we're well aware that any child below the age of 5 might not necessarily have access to an early childhood development center, as has been illustrated by the study that we saw from Sonia. But there are others who might stay with elderly individuals, grandparents, or members of society, or even early childhood development centers, which are born out of an entrepreneurial need or societal need, where Gugu decides to open up a center in order to address some of the societal needs there. What are we doing with regard to equipping the practitioners and the educators to fully understand just where it is that they should be shifting the needle and doing differently to equip these children better in order to identify those leakages that the Minister mentioned to allow us to compete with a level like Seychelles. Perhaps we'll start with you, Kulula, and then Mr. perhaps you can also interlink in terms of international best practice that we can try to implement here.
So I think I've just spoken, Gugu, to firstly issues pertaining just to validation and motivation of our practitioners, so that we can present ECD as a career of choice for these practitioners. But that takes efforts from government, efforts from the private sector, efforts from the non-government sector, and we know that ECD has really been carried on the shoulders of the non-government sector. I beg your pardon. And now it talks to programs that have to be made available for these practitioners to be able to access them. And again, the integrated nature of ECD really shows us that you can't talk about practitioners without looking at issues of availability, of opportunities for them to access. There's funding that has to be brought into place there. There is also the availability of programs themselves that can be able to really charter a way for our practitioners. And the issues pertaining to accreditation, to certification, and one of the anxieties and pressure points that we actually came to understand as we were navigating receiving this function was anxieties on the part of practitioners themselves who were feeling that if they are underqualified, and with us being a department of basic education, are we going to say that the doors are closed to you because you are underqualified? That's why I was talking about ensuring that we really walk that journey with them towards them realizing their professional growth.
Got you. So accreditation and qualification certainly, and even some resources in order to bolster some of these entrepreneurs on their journey. I do want to touch on that note around the international comparison, specifically a country like Seychelles, much smaller population, 90,000 odd, but of course very clear and determined in terms of what it is that they're doing correctly there. Are there examples that we can learn from a country like the Seychelles or even Chile, which continue to rank up quite strongly?
So on the Seychelles example that the Minister has used, I think what we can learn from them is around their institutional arrangements. They've separated out the operational function from the strategic planning, policy planning function. So I think that for me was a lesson from the Seychelles. And then from Chile talks about, it's called the Chile Crece Contigo. Chile grows with you, right? So it's about the whole country, it's about everybody's in this together, to overuse that. And what they have is they have an ECD system. So yes, we, not just programs or individual siloed interventions, but they see the whole kind of, the developmental life cycle of a child. And they are focused very much, in some of the things that Leslie is talking about on the early years. Also, we can learn from Peru, who have managed to reduce their stunting rates over a relatively short period of time, quite significantly. And they have had very strong interventions. I know, Leslie says that stunting is not just about the Department of Health. It is much broader, but we need to shift that because stunting rates in South Africa, even during apartheid, it was as high. It's now as high as it was back then. So with all of our interventions, multiplicity of interventions, we haven't really managed to shift things.
So what's missing in FMCG to come on board? Is it equipping the ECD centers to actually provide the food? Where are we losing the plot? And perhaps that's where you can also come in there, Leslie.
Yes, and so I think the point really is also to start earlier. But I think, as Kalula correctly says, we also, in the current system, need to intervene by supporting practitioners, right? So building on their skills, because they have skills, and then also better management of centers. Another lesson I learned from Peru was program fidelity, which is, what are the basics I need to do? So it's like, fast food is terrible for all of us, like McDonald's or whatever. But their system is, when you go to a McDonald's, you know what you're going to get. I mean, boringly the same thing no matter where you are in the world. But that's the success of McDonald's.
Gotcha.
Right? So program fidelity. Stick to what is the program and stick to it over time.
Got you. I want to link this next question that we've got from one of our online participants, and in a moment we'll get a sense in the room if you do have any questions. I did note your hand, ma'am. I see another hand on this side. Perhaps we've got space for one more, just to allow for the microphone to make its way to you, as we do have about 10 to 15 minutes left for this conversation. But this one...
A point on stunting.
On stunting? Yes. Sure, go ahead. And perhaps we can do that by including this question as it speaks to the Department of Health. And we can interlink between both yourself and Leslie, if you'll allow me, Sipho.
Okay.
But this question essentially comes from one of our online participants, Debuka Mtwazi, who says, great to see this initiative coming into fruition. I still remember very well when it all started, hoping that various government departments won't disappoint in giving it more va-va-voom. Thanks for that. But the question is, are we going to see the Department of Health and other departments coming on board soon? I think clearly by the representation that we have here, we do see many participants on board and collaborating, but specifically to the Department of Health, specifically on the theme of stunting, which has come out significantly in the report. Perhaps, Leslie, if you can tell us here how it is that the Department of Health is looking to address this, and Sipho will give you an opportunity as well to share your thoughts there. Leslie?
So I think stunting is a real challenge that we face. And I think we do not understand fully why stunting rates in South Africa remain so high and remain so intractable, because many of the interventions that have been implemented in South Africa over the past 20 years, particularly expansion of child support grants, we would have anticipated that those would have made a significant contribution to reducing stunting. I must just say that our levels do remain the same, but our criteria, our level at which how we measure stunting has changed to some extent. So we are measuring ourselves against a higher standard than we previously did. But given that, our rates do remain very high. Our understanding is that what it's going to take is really a multi-sectoral approach. It is about poverty, it is about food insecurity, it is about poor feeding practices and poor care of children.
And I'm assuming that's not just the in households, parents as well, who then need to be educated on this, right? Because whilst your formula or milli-meal can be, genetically altered in order to ensure that you're getting extra nutrition, there's other alternatives that we need to be looking at here too.
So absolutely, and that's why I spoke earlier about shifting our paradigm to one where we support families. It's the caregivers it's the mothers who have to breastfeed their children. It's households who feed children. Now, obviously, it needs to operate at different levels. We need to remove the structural barriers, the poverty, the inequality, the
Definitely.
low income. So that is part of the solution. But we do think that there are also things that families and communities have control over. And our role is then to support them so that they are caring for their children in a way that promotes overall growth, health, and well-being of their children.
Got you. I'm hearing synergies then of access to primary health care linked with early childhood development centers, that education of the practitioners together with the households to say, hold on, this is actually how you should be allocating the social relief grant that you actually might receive from government. So as we see here, it's an ongoing initiative of collaboration right down to the ground as well. Sipho, you also had some insight that you were hoping to share here.
Look, I won't claim that I understand what stunting is, but I think I do. Now, here's something that we should all consider. When we grew, all of us, I want to believe that we live from the soil. Now, one of the things that the team is doing from the private sector's perspective, if you do find yourself with an ECD, please just make sure that the garden in that ECD, it's really, really working proper. Because at least those kids, as they come, they can eat. And we have seen a success in that, and that's what the team is doing. So that's one way of making sure that things can work. The other things that we should all consider as South Africans, you know, the wastage of food that you get in the market, it's quite scary. So we always think that there must be money coming from somewhere, but this collaboration that we are talking about here today, if we can coordinate and understand all these things that South Africans got, we can solve some of this. So don't leave that behind, and it shouldn't be just the responsibility of either health or basic education. It's the responsibility of all South Africans.
Gotcha.
Let's use what we've been taught back in the days, go back to the soil and plant so that we can all eat. And I've seen the benefit of that.
Got you. Very important that you mentioned that. And it almost seems as though we're empowering the ECDs themselves to participate in this cohesive ecosystem. And as you're saying, going back to basics instead of waiting again for ongoing assistance and a handout. I've been told that we've got exactly 6 minutes left for this conversation. We did note a question. Your hand was up, ma'am. Perhaps if you have the mic and get to you. There's another hand on this end. I'm hoping that we can take 2 questions perhaps at a time, and your hand has been noted. But I understand we have one roving mic. If you could keep it short and concise, ma'am, addressed to one panelist, please.
It's Pam Picken from the Do More Foundation, sometimes known as an ECD activist and sometimes as an ECD dinosaur. My plea, because I've been in the sector for so long, my plea to all the departments would be to use the National Integrated ECD Policy as the guiding document. Has to be integrated. We have to be holistic in our approach. We need to focus on the child and not just the ECD centres. And we need to see that children are seen as whole beings. And the one thing that I am missing in all the conversations that I've heard today is play. Young children learn through play. We make a huge mistake if we're going to make our programs very educationally focused and we don't recognise how young children learn best. So my question is to the Department of Education, how are you going to ensure that our young children learn through play and that you use the incredible expertise and experience that sits in the NGO sector that, as you so rightly said, have carried the burden of ECD for so many years?
Thank you so much for your question there, Pam. Really appreciate it. Sis Kulula, if you could respond to that very briefly. Ma'am, we'll come to you next with your question. And if you, ma'am, could please keep your hand up towards my right-hand side. If you could keep your hand up so that the microphone could get to you. We'll likely squeeze in one more question, should we have the benefit of time, but your hand has been noticed, sir. Sis Kulula,
Thank you, Pam, for picking that up. Right from the outset, I should have said it. No fears of schoolification of ECD. Yes, and it's something that we've actually been preaching throughout this journey, that we do not intend to schoolify ECD. The curriculum framework that we put out is actually rooted in play, and that is what we want to see happening in all these ECD centers, in the ECD play groups when children are at home, because we also recognize that not all children will be in a center, but that is actually the golden thread that is part and integral to the professional development programs that we provide even to our practitioners, that it is really about ensuring that children play. In our planning, it is also very centered in terms of when we're thinking about putting out a minimum package of resources, it is about ensuring that those resources will enhance as well the play element of early childhood development learning.
I think you've just brought back some nostalgic memories of Ring a Rosie. Maybe that will help in terms of learning here. So, very key point that you've mentioned here. Your question, please, ma'am, if you could keep it sharp, and then we'll come to you on this end.
Thank you. I'm happy you mentioned play when you talk about young children. But I really would also like us to focus on social responsibility when we talk about children. The child has to be at the center. The paperwork shouldn't.
If you could please hold your mic slightly closer just to be more audible.
The paper shouldn't lead what we are doing, but the child should also guide us on how to take care of the child.
Gotcha.
And I would like us to also understand that I would have loved to see the law here. We need to protect children and create an environment that is child-friendly, When I see any bad thing happening to a child, I shouldn't be scared to report. And help should come immediately. In our country, we've forgotten about the child completely, and the child is suffering badly. Hence, we are having educational problems. We will never solve them until we put the child at the center.
Safety. Thank you so much for that, ma'am. Isabella, I want you to note that we do want to come back to you with a response on that one in terms of incorporating protection services to prioritize the safety of children as something that's quite critical. Your question, ma'am, if you could also keep it short and concise and addressed to one panelist, please.
Yes, thanks. I'm glad that play was emphasized, and I just want to reinforce that. I'm from the Puku Children's Literature Foundation. I want to talk about language, and Minister, your husband will love me for this. These discussions are in English. They have to be inclusive, and they have to be in all our languages. And we need to invest in doing that. And we need to pay people to work in ECD in our languages. Because if we exclude our languages, we cause alienation. And that's part of alienation is also part of what makes children not be able to learn.
Yes.
So I think language is very important, and related to language is indigenous knowledge systems and arts. The minister gave examples of proverbs in our languages. And this kind of policy papers, discussions, exclude our languages and exclude our people. So can we invest, especially in radio and our language platforms on radio, for the kind of messages and these discourses? We should have intra-language conversations on these issues. And it's a brilliant initiative, but it's not going to be inclusive if that investment is not made.
Got you. Further disparities in terms of inequity. Thank you so much for that, ma'am. Noted that both have been comments. We'll take one more question at the end. If you could keep it brief, sir, just in the interest of time.
Just a quick one for DSD. The love part. South Africa is tricky when it comes to love. And now, how are we to actually make sure that we actually create an environment that allows that love to actually flow towards the kids as well? Thank you.
Got you. Thank you for that. Isabella, if you could respond to that very briefly, together with the question around security, love within the social construct of South Africa, as well as security.
Let me appreciate the questions. It goes back to us going back to the policy, national policy on ECD. And when we look at the vision, it says all infants and young children and their families in South Africa live in environments conducive to their developments, which means that when we talk about early childhood development, we cannot confine it only to early learning. We need to look at the environment in a holistical approach. We need to ensure that everything that we do is child-centered. We need to ensure to look at how the environment influence or hamper, on the nurturing of a child. And therefore, it is very important that, child protection become key, and in the ECD centers or where ECD is being provided, there should be child protection measures that are being put in place. We need to have registers and record each and every incident that happens within the ECD center. And that must be reported to the Department of Social Development or to the social workers that are working within the basic education and environment, so that those issues can be able to be dealt with. And I'm sure we are quite aware that there were some disturbing incidents that, were on the link in the past, about how children are being abused in early childhood development centers. And those things are happening in the eyes of everybody and they are not being reported. And therefore, it is very critical that, every incident must be reported. Every person who's really responsible for abuse of children needs to be dealt with and be removed not to work with children. Hence, we are talking about the National Child Protection Register. Now, the environment...
We'll have to leave it there for today, unfortunately, because we are under immense pressure for time. time. My sincere apologies. By no means do we mean that your opinion does not matter, but we really are under pressure for time. The screen in front of me says 1 minute, wrap it up. But really appreciate your insight. And I think really a clarion call for all of us as members of society to take up the responsibility to protect our children, whether they are our own or that of our neighbors, to follow through with play, prioritize indigenous languages, as well as making sure that we follow through with the safety themes that we need to prioritize. One thing is certain is that this is a multi-pronged approach that will be required. It will not change overnight, but continuous evolution and participation to make sure that we're on the right track. Ladies and gentlemen, kindly give my panelists a round of applause as they make their way off stage due to certain commitments. Thank you. Thank you once again for your contribution, and we realize that very limited time, but a lot to cover. But at least we've touched on many of the themes and aspects that we certainly do need to ensure that we prioritize in the conversations going forward as we leave this room, as we network, as we build up on strategies, and of course continue to get the buy-in of participants from various ends of our industries. Well, on that note, ladies and gentlemen, and to keep with the theme and the program for today, we do shift gears now to provide some further insight from one of the key supporters who've assisted us in being able to provide this data and information to you here today. Again, we extend our thanks and their gratitude for their partnership and, of course, ongoing efforts to actually assist us within these collaborative efforts. Allow me to warmly introduce, ladies and gentlemen, to give us their closing statement, of course, observations on the outcomes that they've heard so far here today, and some clarity on their ongoing participation and assistance. Warmly welcome to the stage, ladies and gentlemen, to offer their closing statement, the Consul General of the U.S. Embassy, Vincent Spera.